herzlich willkommen zum Female Leadership Podcast. Mein Name ist Vera und ich bin Host hier im Podcast, in dem es darum geht, dass du deinen ganz eigenen Stil im Job und Leben findest und deinen Weg mutig und selbstbewusst gehst. In dieser Folge geht es um im weitesten Sinne die Zukunft der Arbeit, wie wir gute Entscheidungen treffen können, vor allem auch zeitgemäße, auf die Zukunft zeitgemäß blickende Entscheidungen in Organisationen unterstützen und fördern können. Dazu habe ich gesprochen mit Ben Hammersley. Er ist Journalist, Technik-Experte und Futurist und berät Unternehmen und Institutionen, zum Beispiel das britische Außenministerium, in Zukunfts- und Innovationsfragen. Außerdem ist er Experte für Produktivitäts- und Effizienztheorien. Er bezieht bei seinen Analysen zum Beispiel soziale, politische, kulturelle Faktoren sowie die großen Themen unserer Zeit mit ein. Klimawandel, Pandemie, Ähnliches. Darüber haben wir gesprochen. Er versteht sich als Übersetzer zwischen verschiedenen Branchen, Generationen und Kulturen, um komplexe Themenfelder runterzubrechen und mit den Unsicherheiten, die uns zurzeit bewegen, umgehen zu können. Mit ihm habe ich darüber gesprochen, was es aktuell wirklich braucht, um die Zukunft der Arbeit zu gestalten und warum wir dafür vielleicht auch immer wieder ganz vorne beginnen müssen und somit mit einem wortwörtlichen Beginners Mind auf Tätigkeiten herangehen können. Es ist tatsächlich ein durchaus auch, also eher so großes High-Level-Perspektiven-Gespräch geworden, in dem wir uns so den ganz großen Themen genähert haben und dann immer spezieller geworden, spezifischer geworden sind. Auf jeden Fall sehr spannend und perspektivverändernd und ich hoffe, dass du für dich eine ganze Menge Inspiration und vielleicht auch den einen oder anderen Gedanken hier rausziehen kannst. Ben ist Brite, lebt aber in New York und deswegen ist es ein Gespräch auf Englisch. Er ist aber wirklich sehr gut verständlich und wird es auch ein schönes Sprachtraining für dich, insofern diese Folge in englischer Sprache. Und ich freue mich sehr, mit dir das Interview zu teilen. Wenn du Lust hast, über den Podcast hinaus im Kontakt zu bleiben, dann komm gerne in meinen E-Mail-Verteiler verastrauch.com/newsletter. Ganz viel Freude mit diesem Interview mit Ben Hammersley und dann legen wir gleich mal los. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's so good to have you and to talk about the future of everything.
Oh no, not everything.
No.
Okay, strap in everyone. We're going to be here for hours.
Where are you right now? I didn't ask that earlier.
Right now I'm in Brooklyn in New York in my office. You can't see, but looking out the window there's a beautiful blue sky and my garden and one very, very fat squirrel that just sits in my garden and eats all my bird food. Anyway, yes, I'm in Brooklyn in New York.
Okay. Is there anything besides everything we're going to talk about at this conversation, anything that you're particularly interested at the moment?
I think I'm interested in really everything. I'm actually interested in what you're going to ask me about. So let's get on to that, and then we can have a discussion.
Yeah, sometimes people are, researching a topic, or there's something they just read and they're really worried about, or they think about a lot. So I think it's always interesting to know. Maybe something pops up later to your mind.
Actually, I think that's an interesting discussion itself, that a good deal of my job is about worrying about everything. A lot of my work is as a futurist, so I help people think about the future. And when you're thinking about the future, you have to think about really everything. This is one of my major topics, really, when I talk with my clients, is that you can't just talk about the future and only talk about technology, for example. You have to talk about culture and politics and climate and fashion and, society and religion and all of the other, everything really in the world. And so when people ask, as you just did, is there a specific thing that I'm specifically looking at right now or specifically interested in? The answer is usually yes and no. I mean, of course, I'm always looking at specific things very deeply at any time, but in general, I try to look at everything all at once. And that's it's very difficult. It's very difficult, but it's very, very necessary for people to think about the future, is that they have to pay attention to not just, technology or the workplace, but they also have to pay attention to how they eat or how they educate their children or how they're going to travel or what's important to them spiritually or what they think is beautiful, all of those things. And as those change, then they change everything else as well. So you can't just say, well, I'm most interested right now in climate change, for example. Mm-hmm. Even though climate change is probably, the most important or the equal first most important thing over the next 20 years, you can't just look at that. You have to look at the rest of the world too.
I think for me, because I see a lot of connections, so I'm very interested as well. I'm broadly interested. And for me, it was a relief, by the way, to accept that and don't feel wrong because I am so generally interested in a world, especially in a business world, where I actually was confronted with people who told me that I need to specialize and I need to make up my mind what I want to do. So that was one thing that I felt very free once I allowed myself to be broadly interested.
Yes.
And something that I experience is when I meet people, it's basically like there are two kinds of people. It's more complex, but it feels like there are people who understand that everything is connected and it's super complex and that can actually be beautiful. Yeah, because it gives us also, as I heard, so much where we can do stuff and change things. Yeah.
Yes.
And then there are people who don't want to hear it, basically.
That's right.
And I think it's very interesting how to communicate this complexity, because basically this can be applied to any problem that you face in the workplace as well, I think.
I agree with you completely. And I think that one of the biggest problems that we face at the moment, both generally as people in the world, but also as individuals in the workplace, is that gap between people who think that everything has a very simple solution and people who recognize the complexities and the interconnectedness of everything. I don't think that gender essentialist definitions are necessarily useful, but it does tend to be, in my experience, usually men who have a very simple, very loud, single topic explanation for the world. And it's usually women who have a much more complex, much wider, more inputs, reasoning about why things are happening in a company or in a neighborhood or in a community or in the world. One of the things that I speak about a lot at the moment is the fact that over the past few years, certainly post-COVID, and this year I think is a very good example of this, that really all of the major changes that we are facing in the world, whether you're talking about the workplace or geopolitics or culture, all of the major changes are coming from that complex, multidimensional, interconnected place and not from the single, technology did it type argument. And that is very, very difficult for a lot of people to understand. You only have to look at political debates in different countries to see that, right? For example, at the moment we have inflation around the world. And here in the United States, the political debate here, most people, when you talk about inflation, they will say, well, it's Joe Biden's fault. And I mean, that's stupid on 1,000 levels. But one of the main reasons it's stupid is because the idea that something like inflation, which is a complex phenomenon in itself, can be the fault of a single person, and that the removal of that person and replacing them with somebody else will magically make, inflation different. And so you have this, and the same sort of single reason argument happened with Brexit, for example. I'm originally British before I moved to the US, and before Brexit happened, all of the political debate around Brexit from the Leave side was that the European Union was the reason everything was terrible in their eyes, and all you had to do was leave, and everything would suddenly be much, much better. And what has happened, which is what people like myself who, talk about this for a living, what we predicted was that the incredible complexity and interconnectedness of our economies would mean that after Brexit, the UK economy would destroy itself, really. And That's exactly what's happened. But you can't talk about that to people who can't understand sort of complex behavior, can't understand complex systems. And so one of the major problems I think we face today is between those two groups of people, between people who think the world is simple and clockwork and mechanical and everybody has their right place and everybody should do a single thing. And if you show any idea of that you can be in lots of different places and do lots of different things, and that you understand that the world is much more complex and interconnected, then they hate you for that. And then on the other side, you have the people who understand that the world is incredibly complex and how the next innovation that you make in your own life would be a combination of your interests in technology, your interest in 17th century fashion and your interests in winemaking or something, and when you add those together, then you come up with something new and beautiful and useful. And so this is a long way to say, I agree with you completely, but I also think it's a very important thing to think about for the listeners to think about in terms of both the value that they get from being multifaceted, the value they get from having lots of interests, and also why people would tell them that that's wrong. I think it's very interesting that when you say you're told to specialize, because there are two sides to that, right? There's one side which says you should take the subject that you're most interested in and learn a lot about that. That's almost a positive side of specialization. That's saying to somebody, yeah, you could be really, really, really good at this topic. But the other side of specialization is that they're telling you to stop talking about or stop thinking about or stop knowing about everything else. And that is in itself inherently a power dynamic, right? It's basically somebody telling you to no longer be as good as you are in everything else. And I don't see why that's good in any situation.
It's interesting that you bring up the topic of power, because I was thinking about that while you were talking. And it's not what we wanted to talk about, but I think we can make a jump into what we wanted to talk about by connecting it maybe to the aspect of leadership.
Yes.
Because I see the essence of leadership in power. Because no matter if it's most of the cases when we think about leadership, I think is when we think about people are handed the power because of the position they have, for example, in a company. Right. You can also be powerful by being super connected, by having prestige and influence on people. Those are also powerful people. And this is also part of the broader leadership definition as I use it.
Sure.
So from a power perspective, and if we look at leadership and what we need for the future, if I understood you correctly, this is one essential thing, that we have a lot of people in power, but also the powerful organizing processes or, dynamics in which people in a democracy, for example, are empowered by making wise decisions, which means not ignoring the complexity of the world, basically. Because I think Brexit is a good example. I think there are people who use it smartly, oversimplifying stuff, giving easy answers. And then there are people who are open to it. And I wouldn't particularly say it's their fault or something. It's just maybe the privileges they didn't have, the education, the discussions, the insights they didn't have, which then can easier be used because of the dynamic within a society, and the education system. And I wouldn't just put it all on the education system. I think there's much more complexity also to that. But in the end, it's about how do we get to a state where as many people as possible are just, global citizens who can make informed decisions. Yeah.
So I think there's a very important point here, which is that you have to have a true understanding of how the world actually is. Because if you don't, then it doesn't really matter how powerful you are in terms of your role, in terms of the structural position you're in. You might be CEO of a company. You might be the final deciding person in your organization. you have ultimate power over that organization, right? You're the CEO, you're the founder. You're the founder and CEO. You own it completely. Every single final decision that can be made in that organization is made by you. You're the most powerful person in the universe of that company. But if your understanding of how the world actually is wrong, then your power is meaningless in the wider sense. You can be an incredibly powerful politician and make incredibly far-reaching decisions which affect millions of people. But if your decision is based on a worldview which is just wrong, it just doesn't match the real world, then it doesn't matter how powerful you are. Your intent is never going to come true. Again and again, my lessons from all of my clients and all of my work has been that it doesn't matter how powerful somebody thinks somebody is or how they think they are. It doesn't matter what position they're in. It doesn't matter how qualified they are. It doesn't matter how much agency and power that they are given by others. If the way that they understand how the world works is not the same as how the world works, then every decision and every action that they take will be broken. It just won't work because they're not acting on the world as it is today. They're acting on an imaginary world in their head. And so understanding complexity is a major part of that because the world is complex. But we also have to be constantly checking that the people that we give power to actually understand the world in which they are using that power. Because you see this all the time in government. We have politicians in every country who seem to be completely confused by the world that they live in. The line that I like to use is, we've given the responsibility for the future to people who are confused by the present, which I think is, a huge problem. But we also see it in the workplace where, for example, take branding. Let's do something that's like less political, right? Branding. You could be working in a marketing department or working in a branding department of an organization, and your boss, or you as the boss, could be the most powerful person there. You get to decide absolutely everything. But if you're making decisions based on your idea of what people think your brand is, those are going to be different decisions than you making decisions based on knowing what people's view of your brand actually is. And we see so many companies, and I'm sure you can think of, examples in your own areas, right? But you can see so many companies who act as if they are completely different to who they actually are. They act as if people think they're amazing, or they act as if their heritage or their brand is incredibly strong. Whereas in reality, nobody cares. And that's a problem because that means that whoever's doing those, making those decisions is just making bad decisions because they're not able to see the world as it truly is. And so not being able to see the world as it truly is, not being able to accept it is the sort of the cognitive risk of going into the future. And we see that cognitive risk in everything. So earlier we were talking about what do I think about when I think about the future? Well, I think about many things, but there are many topics there where, like climate change, for example, where none of the decisions that people make about climate change are very good because nobody wants to stop first and really try and understand what climate change actually is. And so because of that, everybody's decisions around climate change are just wrong.
You mean political decisions or?
Yeah, political decisions and business decisions and just understanding the world. Climate change is a very good example of this because if you read any of the scientific reports, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations report, which is the big and the most scientifically solid one. If you read the latest ones, they're extremely bad. Like, they're not good at all. And Yet if you speak to people in the street, or you speak to politicians, or you speak to just regular, speak to CEOs or whatever, and you say, tell me, how bad is climate change? They're all going to say probably the same thing, which is, it's kind of bad sometime in the next 20 years. No, it's going to be really, really bad this summer. And this summer will be the coolest summer of the rest of your life. And next summer will be even hotter. And next summer, and almost certainly this year, in the next few weeks, there's going to be a heat wave through Central Europe, which will kill lots of people. In the same way as almost certainly in the next few months, there's going to be 20 or so hurricanes come up the east coast of the United States, and which will be driven by climate change, which will kill a lot of people, and so on and so on and so on. Climate change is happening already. And nobody really wants to look at it clearly, because if you have to look at it clearly, it's horrible. And so we make lots of decisions based on a view of the world which is not accurate. And it's not accurate because we're not looking at the things we need to look at. It's like making decisions about your personal finances without ever looking at your bank account.
And there are these cases, and it's because it's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
I just wrote a book I'm finishing these days, actually, about discomfort. And I see it everywhere. It's because we don't want to face the fact. And it's with people with their finances as well. If you have so many bills piling up, I know there are people who throw away their bills.
Right, exactly.
If I don't see it, it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
In Germany and in Europe, the Fridays for Future movement, this is the one thing, or one of the few examples in the political sphere that gives me hope. When I look at young people who are very well educated, who face the facts, who, name it, and who don't go away. Yeah. And I like that, because it would be interesting to hear from you how you feel regarding hope for us and our planet. Yeah. But for me, sometimes it's hard. And this is something that gives me hope, to see young people so well educated and an active civil society. Yeah. Or as part of an active civil society. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think if there's one thing that does give me hope especially about civil society, is sort of young people and young women especially. I think there are many, many political fights, especially here in the United States, that are about to become very, very different, because the people who are going to be involved in those fights are people who were teenagers when Trump was president. I don't think you can be a feminist, liberal feminist woman who was 13 when Trump became president. You're now entering college. You're now able to vote. I can't see that those people are anything less than completely radicalized in a good way, and young men too, but they get to take a back seat, I think, for a little bit. I think a lot of political discourse and a lot of political conversations are going to change very rapidly over the next few years, because we have a whole generations of kids who now are digital natives to the point that they're almost unrecognizable by older generations, and who are extremely radical in their politics, and who are extremely angry. I think that there isn't really an understanding right now amongst the political classes in any country of exactly how angry women under the age of 25 are. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and it's very interesting to have conversations with her. She goes to an international school that teaches them lots of sort of political activism and things, so maybe she's not typical of every 7-year-old girl in the Western Hemisphere. But I have conversations with her where, as she's learning about climate change or endangered species or human rights, equal rights, racism, etc., you can just see in her eyes not understanding, not fatigue, not, it's always been like that, there's nothing we can do about it. You can see in her eyes, even at the age of 7, a very strong underlying idea of, well, we're going to have to burn this all down, aren't we, Daddy? I think, the one thing that gives me hope is basically, young women between the ages of 5 and 25 right now who are about ready to burn the place down. And I hope to give them matches because, it's long overdue. And this all ties together to the fact that there are plenty of people in leadership positions today who don't want to look at the truth, don't want to look at the situation as it is. We can take this back to the world of work, the world of the workplace, right? Something much, much less hardcore. But like the working from home debate, something that is discussed everywhere around the world. Is it possible for people to get their work done from home? And shouldn't they have to go into the office and sit in the office? And although it might be different, of course, for specific jobs and specific roles and things like that, but the vast majority of office jobs around the world, and certainly, again, in all of the large corporations that I've worked with, the call to go back into the office is nothing whatsoever to do with the work. It is always to do with the boss not being able to do their job without being able to see their people right in front of them. And that's a problem with the boss. That's not a problem with the employees. And it's a huge symptom of the fact that corporations don't understand the place they are in the world and the world as it is today. So those bosses not only don't understand that the only reason they want people to come into the office is because of their own personal failing, that they can't manage people if they can't see them, which is pathetic, to be honest, but also because they don't understand that when you ask people to come into the office, you're not just asking them to be in the office, you're asking them to commute, you're asking them to have childcare, you're asking them to eat differently, you're asking them to wear different clothes and then have to go out and buy those different clothes. You're asking them to do you're asking them to put their health at risk, and so on and so on and so on. And those things are all unacceptable now. But if your boss doesn't see that, if your boss doesn't understand that that's how the world is changing, even if it hasn't changed completely in that way in your local area, but if your boss doesn't understand, if your boss doesn't see that the world has changed, then every decision they make is going to be wrong and just ineffective and bad because they're making decisions about that will only work in a world that no longer exists. In a world where it was perfectly fine to say, as a condition of your employment, you must sit in a car for an hour and a half every day. And that's not a thing anymore.
So how to change people's minds, or how to give them how to reduce this cognitive risk, as you said? Because I think that's the big challenge. I mean, there are people in power who, and maybe not all, of course, but there are many people in power who would like the world to be as it supposedly always has been. Yeah. And now it's changing and everything is so rapid and,
sure.
For them it's comfortable, it's okay. So job sharing, flexible work models, all this stuff, childcare. I haven't cared about it the past, 30, 40 years. Why should I now? Yeah. Or 20, 10 years. Why now?
Well, I think there are a couple of very strong reasons, right? One is because everybody else is, and so you're just going to lose all of your employees, right? So there's market forces in action. I mean, we saw this very early on in the pandemic, actually. We saw it in 2021 when there were some tech companies were saying, well, we need people to start coming back into the offices. And as soon as they did that, just all of their engineers would start looking for new jobs. And then you had other companies who would say, we need more engineers, and we guarantee you'll never come into the office. And suddenly all of those people moved. They moved from the company that wants them to drive into the office, and they went to the companies that let them work from home. So there's just that. There's just the more modern companies will have better people, and they will have more people wanting to work for them, and they'll be more successful. And so over time, it's just a natural evolution that will happen. But I think also you can make the positive case, which is that if you do pay attention to these sort of changes in the world, then it makes for a better business in the first place. That you actually want people to be happy, and you want people to be rested, and you want people to be mentally at their best and physically at their best in order for them to do the best possible type of job. And that's because the nature of the work itself has changed completely. It's true, sure, if you work in a factory and your job is making if your job is making pencils, right, then you can only do that in a pencil factory. You have to go into the factory and you have to make pencils at the pencil factory because that's the best place for you to do that, right? But inside the factory, if you ever go to see a pencil factory, especially in Germany, right, the pencil factories in Germany are beautiful because when you go inside, the machines are incredibly well maintained, and the people there work very specific hours because it's difficult work and you have to be, fully concentrating on it. And everything is clean and everything's in the right place and everything's done to very great precision. There are rules about the best way to make pencils based on the fact that people get tired and based on the fact that people, make mistakes and so on. But when we moved to a type of work which is not making pencils, it's just like endless work, just creative work, then all of those rules went away. And people completely forgot that human beings are human, that human beings get tired, that human beings make mistakes, that human beings don't have good ideas at 2:00 in the morning if they haven't slept for the previous week, and so on and so on. And what when we all moved to work from home and COVID happened, what we found was that generally, when you did pay attention to those things, when you did pay attention to people having enough sleep and eating well and not having to sit in a car for 2 hours a day, and et cetera, then even the unending creative work type of work became much better. People became, I don't want to say productive, because productive is like in a factory, but the quality of their work was better. The insights they reached were better. The creative work they did was better because they were able to do it in a way which was better for them as individuals, better for them for their health and their mental health and to fit in with the rest of their lives, which made them happier, which made them do better work, which made their companies more successful. And so I think you can actually sell it almost as a benefit. You are employing these people because they're good at their jobs. Do you want to make them even better at their jobs? Do you want to make your employees really amazing? Okay. Tell them they can work from home. And then give them the equipment that they need, right? Instead of paying rent on a big office somewhere, take a very small proportion of that money and give them a very big monitor and a nice desk and a good chair and all the things they need to work from home. And then people will be much happier and the work they do is much better. And we know this now. It's just part of the world. So if you're making decisions based on how you think the world should be, and you think the world should be like it was in 2005, well, you're an idiot. I mean, come on.
Are there other trends that you see? I mean, because we haven't spoken about that actually. What are the big trends that you see for the future of work?
It depends on the area of work, right? So everybody's job is different. And if you're talking about something like creative work, like I was saying just now, I think the big trend at the moment is, other than working from home, but it's actually connected with working from home. The big trend at the moment is people building their tools in a way that works really well for them. And by tools, I mean everything from their desk and their keyboard and their mouse and their screen and all of that, but also the software and the online tools that they use to help them think. And a lot of that, it comes with, say, AI, lots of new interesting AI tools that people are using. So just to give you an example, you can't see this because obviously I'm talking to you down the camera that's on top of my computer, but I have a extremely wide monitor. It's a 50-inch wide monitor with my laptop on another stand next to it. So it's for me, if I'm looking at this corner of the screen, I cannot see the other corner of the side of the screen, right? It's so wide, I actually have to sort of swivel around like this. I have a custom-built keyboard, which is all at funny angles and with custom-built switches in it because it exactly fits my hands and helps me, type perfectly and so on. But they're also, all of the keys are all custom defined so that I can do all sorts of things with different key presses, which you can't do standard. And then I have a whole load of tools that are always running on my desktop for finding information, for finding things, finding linked. If I'm looking at one academic paper, find me all of the papers that are related to that in some way. I have tools that help me write code when I just write in English what I want it to do, and it gives it back to me in Python or Sparkle or one of the languages I'm using at the moment. I have a whole load of image recognition software that looks at images and pulls lots of information out of it. I have all these little tools, and these are all tools that I've either made myself or I've glued together from other people's tools. All told, when you add all of that together, the big screen, the keyboard, the software, all of that, I am at my home office, I would say probably 20 times as productive as I could be if I just sat in front of a laptop. Just if you gave me your laptop and told me to do some work, maybe even more. I actually find myself scaring myself with some of the work that I'm doing at the moment, where when I'm using these tools, I'm doing it at a speed which is maybe, like I say, 20, 30, 40, 50 times faster than the way that I'd done it when I'd done those similar projects 10 years ago.
So is it just technical tools?
It's technical tools, but they're technical tools that are built on top of social constructs, right? So you can't have a tool which looks at academic publishing and finds papers about the subject you're interested in without the academic world themselves having a community which is dedicated to making sure that academic papers are made in a specific way that allows that sort of thing to happen. And so, yes, the tools that I'm using are technology based, right? But those technologies are based on top of a social practice that happened within the academic community, which is based on top of a political process of the fact that the European Union paid for a lot of that stuff to happen, right? And so on and so on. And the same thing I have some other tools which are tapping into communities of people. I have different communities of people for the different subjects I'm interested in, and I can communicate with them in ways that is much more efficient today than it was, say, 10 years ago, like lots of discords and so on. When I show my setup to people who do similar work to me, but who do it inside a large organization or inside a large government department, when I show my setup to them, well, they're very upset usually. And the reason they're very upset is because they say that for them to get a similar setup would be months and months and months of arguing inside their organizations. And I think that's true. I think that's very upsetting because it's a symptom of leaders inside organizations not understanding the world that they are leading in and not understanding that the world has changed now to the degree the people who use those technologies are 20 or 30 or 40 times better at their work than the people who don't.
We know the work is going to change. And those people like you who have the super big screen and all the tools and stuff, those are the very few super privileged, very well educated. It's like the tip of the iceberg, and they need the tools and stuff, and it's making most likely a big impact what happens to them. But I ask myself, what are the strategies in place, or maybe from your perspective as someone who with concept and strategy looks into the future, what is there to do with this big shift in the workplace where many people are going to be left behind for no reason? It's not my fault if I am born in a different part of the world and I didn't have the access to education, healthcare, whatever. Yeah. So, and the work that I'm doing right now is most likely not going to be there in 10, 20 years.
It's interesting. There's a couple of things to say about that. The first one is that that's always the case. We've been having the what are we going to do with all of the people who are left behind conversation for 400 years, because every generation invents a whole new set of technologies and a whole new way of doing everything. That's always been the case. Now, that's not to say that it's not a problem. What I mean is that change happens, it happens very quickly, but it also happens slowly, in that it's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly everybody in the workplace, apart from a few, everybody in the middle is going to be replaced by a robot or replaced by software overnight. You only have to just look around and see the number of organizations that are still working who all run on Windows 95 or, a fax machine or something like that. There's huge amounts of even the most sophisticated economies in the world that still work on old systems. And there are very, 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 very few organizations that are incredibly cutting edge and super modern. There's almost a natural process that it just sort of kind of happens naturally as people retire and as companies go bust and so on. And in many ways, it's a systemic thing that we can't really do anything about. What we can do is on an individual level, which is to do this for ourselves. And it's actually nothing to do with education or access into things in the past, interestingly, because I think one of the things you realize when you start looking at the more interesting modern ways of doing things is that the reason that they're interesting and the reason that they're modern is because they're not about doing things that happen in the way that are taught in, Harvard Business School, or the way that you could only learn if you were a middle-aged man working for a large company, right? That actually all of the really interesting ways of working were invented very specifically because they were invented by either people like myself who under no circumstances can work inside a large organization as an employee, or invented by young women or artists or people of color or whatever the minority is in that particular field, who didn't have access to the Harvard MBA or to the job that gave them access to Salesforce or something like that, and instead had to make their own sort of punk version of it. And when they made their own version of it, they made better ones, more interesting ones. And does that come down to technical skill? To a certain degree, yes. But I think the most important thing it comes down to is actually the ability to look at every problem that you face today and look at it afresh. I teach a personal technique to people. This is my sort of like inner yoga teacher or something like that. My sort of, coming out. But there's a technique that I teach to people which is called constant legacy-free reinvention. I'll teach it you now, okay? So this is a technique I think everybody should use, and you'll see the reason for it after I tell you. So what you do is you choose a day. So let's say tomorrow morning, right? From the moment you wake up, right, till the moment you go to bed tomorrow, pay attention to every physical action that you take. You're brushing your teeth, you're writing an email, you're getting in the car and driving, whatever it is. When you find yourself taking a physical action, you have to ask two questions, right? The first question is, what problem am I solving by doing this physical action? And the second question is, if I had to solve that problem today for the first time, how would I do it? If I had to solve that problem today, but I was solving it for the first time, how would I do it? And the reason I say that first time is because most people, when they're solving a problem they've had before, and they use the solution that they used before, or they use the solution that they were taught, which itself is usually the solution to a problem that the person who taught them had before, or maybe the person who taught them had before. So really, the solution matches a problem from a long time ago, and the solution is old. But when you do this process yourself, when you say, okay, well, if I had to solve this today for the very first time, what you find is that for a lot of the things, if not almost everything in your life, either you can't remember why you do it in the first place. There's no reason for it. So there's an easy innovation there is just to not do it anymore. Or you find that there are actually 10 different ways now of solving that problem, 10 new ways of going about it. And if you were to choose one of those 10 new ways, then the problem would be solved quicker or better, or would be taken away forever, or whatever it is. When I teach people this and they go away and they do it, what they find is that they realize that everything that they defined in their lives as being unchangeable, and usually, I mean bad things, all the bad things in their life that they've defined as being unchangeable are not. And that they can reinvent themselves and reinvent the way they do things very easily. And once they get into that habit, then the problem we had right at the beginning of being left behind by these new tools and these new capabilities and these new ways of working, that problem goes away completely, because you are that person, right? You become the person who's doing things in the new way. You become the person who's doing things in the better way. And so you become the person who then actually leads everybody else. When we're talking about the future, I have maybe a slightly different definition of leadership. My view of leadership when we talk about the future is the people who just show other people how to do it. It's not a matter of authority. It's not who's the boss. It's who's the influencer, right? Who's the person who says, look, I'm not in charge of how you do things, but if I was solving that problem that you're solving, I would do it using this thing over here. Or I would point out that the problem they're solving isn't a problem anymore. And that to me is true leadership, because that leads people into a new place, right? It takes them to the place in the future. I think the thing about being left behind is you're only left behind if you're not moving. And you've got to keep moving. And so you have to have some form of habit or some process in your life which makes you move forward. And a very, very simple way of doing that is just to look at the way you do things and just go, is there a better way of doing this? Is there a better way of having this meeting? Do we even need this? Why are we having this meeting? And so on and so on, right? Or like, what's the best way of having lunch? You'll come up with so many innovations in your life if you just ask those simple questions. And it can be very, very, very uncomfortable. You're right. Mm-hmm. And it does slow you down as well, because at the beginning, because you have to start Googling things, Mm-hmm. But you will find that it's not that you have to become the next generation of worker, that you have to go back to school to learn about computers or be completely retrained. It's not that at all. You just have to see what you're doing and just go, is there a better way of doing this now? Last time I looked, I was taught how to do this 30 years ago. I wonder if somebody's invented a better way since I went to school. Mm-hmm. Yes. Usually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you can do this, you can do this for kind of everything, right? Things get better. And if you don't go and look and see if there's anything better now, then you'll always be left behind, because all you're doing really is just continuing to live in the past.
Yeah. Of course, there are people who have more access because they have the money and they have the time to research and look. And they can move ahead, yeah? They have more responsibility for the change, so...
Yes, and that's, again, is another leadership issue, which is that if you are in a position of privilege where you do have the budget and the time and all of that to be able to address those things, to go through this process, then yes, you are privileged in that respect. But then your job is to go back and say, hey guys, you don't need to go through this process. I already did it. I've already done it for you, or I've already done it, and I came to this conclusion, and we could try doing this instead. If people are being left behind and they genuinely don't have the resources, mm-hmm. Or the time to be able to address that change, then the leadership job is to do it for them and give them the better tools. It's not to sit there and go, oh my God, if only they had the time to do something different, they would be in a better position. Like, no. And that's what a boss should be doing, not trying to get people to come into the office.
We are already at the end. Where can people find you because I think we could talk for hours, but we're coming to the end. So if people want more from you, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ben Hammersley, but I delete my tweets as I go, and they're mostly stupid jokes. Or I speak at lots of different conferences and things, so there's lots of videos of me online. And if you're in Brooklyn, then I'm very, very tall, and you can almost certainly find me.
I have some final questions.
Okay.
People who will listen to this podcast are super interested in books. So
yes.
Are there any books that you maybe particularly like to give to other people, or that you've recently read, or a long time ago? Something that just comes to your mind. I know this can be an overwhelming question.
Yeah, there's a very, very good book called Finite and Infinite Games, Finite and Infinite Games by James Cars, which is an amazing book. It's very difficult to sort of explain. And I don't know if it's been translated, but that's an amazingly good book. But that's sort of a philosophically thing. And I don't know, what am I reading at the moment? Mostly I'm on TikTok at the moment. It's terrible. It's completely destroyed my ability to read books.
So who do you follow on TikTok? Yeah, okay. I'm not on TikTok.
Oh, yeah, please don't. Don't go onto TikTok. TikTok is the social media equivalent of crack cocaine and really should be illegal.
Yes.
It's so good. It's so good.
The time you save by working 50 times as productive, you go straight into TikTok.
Pretty much, yeah. To be honest with you, and I think, you know what, though, I think that is almost the meaning of life, right? The time that I save by being more productive with my work is then I can then use it to sit and scroll through TikTok and laugh. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But in terms of books, I'm reading a book at the moment called American Hippopotamus by John Mooallem, and it's a true story about these two great Americans who had a big plan in the 1920s to bring hippopotamuses to the United States so that they could live in the swamps in Louisiana in giant herds of hippopotamuses, which could then be harvested and used for meat. It was a very, very serious plan that had enormous amounts of support from the newspapers and from the Congress and everything. And it didn't happen for very interesting reasons. You have to read the book. But we were very, very close to an alternative world where the majority of the meat eaten in the United States would have been hippopotamus meat from wild herds of hippopotamuses roaming across Louisiana and Florida. So that's the book I was actually reading last night. So there you go.
Ben, thank you so much for your time and this interview.
Thank you very much.
All the best for your work. I hope for a better future.
Thanks very much.
Ich hoffe sehr, dass du für dich hier was mitnehmen konntest, dass du vielleicht auch einfach nur eine ganze Menge Inspiration und vielleicht auch mal so eine andere Denkweise. Ich finde es schon sehr spannend, aus so futuristischer Perspektive auf Themen zu blicken, dass du das vielleicht für dich mitnimmst und jetzt so die Gedanken noch ein bisschen kreisen lässt rund um die großen Fragen der Zukunft, die dich bewegen, die du siehst und wie sie vielleicht sich auch auf deinen Alltag übertragen lassen. Und ich danke dir sehr für deine Zeit und Aufmerksamkeit, wünsche dir eine richtig schöne Woche, freue mich, wenn wir uns hier nächste Woche wieder hören. Bis dahin und alles Liebe, deine Vera.